Let me introduce myself to you. I'm Barbara Biber, member of the faculty of Bank Street College of Education, New York City. By training, I'm a psychologist. By interest, I think I can best describe myself as someone who has cared very deeply about how children learn, grow, what kind of schooling we can provide for them that will give them the best opportunity to develop into healthy and effective human adults. Today, I'm talking to you because we've all faced the sudden and challenging prospect of having thousands, in fact hundreds of thousands, of our very young children, 4- and 5-year-olds, enter school. The purpose is, by this time, known to all of us. This is part of an effort to compensate, as far as we can, for the deprivation that many children have suffered because of the circumstance of life into which they were born. And we turn to schooling, interestingly enough, as a way of making up for this neglect and its deleterious effect, because we have a general assumption, an important one. What happens to children in the early years of life, how they learn, how they feel about themselves, what ideas they get about people and the world in which they live, is basic and important for all the rest of the years to come. Fortunately, we've had experience with education for these young children. And even though the children from the disadvantaged areas will need certain special understanding, special adjustments to their particular needs and characteristics, I want to really say, first of all, that these children are like all other children. Fundamentally, they have the same potentialities, they have the same curiosity, the same basic human problems to face in the course of growing up, except that life has given them some extra ones that no children should really have. So, from our point of view, when we talk about education, we want to begin first by talking about what is our understanding of good education for young children, all young children. Now, on our side, we have a great asset as teachers and as parents. Human beings are curious. And if the school can live up to its possibilities, they can remain curious. Children begin by being very eager to know, to understand, to be able to do, to make an impact on the world in which they live. And another quite remarkable thing about childhood is that in the first few short years, a simple 4 or 5 years of life, the ways in which a child, a human being, can know the world in which he lives goes through a remarkable evolution. It begins right in the beginning, almost at the beginning, rather, when the only ways of knowing that an infant has available to him is tasting, putting in his mouth, or by seeing. He knows his fingers because they have a taste, because he looks at them, because he twists them around. His whole world can be known to him only through the way in which his senses give him information. But between infancy and the 5-year-old, or the little older child who is about to enter the first grade of school, a really quite remarkable developmental process has taken place. And by the end of his kindergarten year, the child's way of knowing about his world has reached a really highly advanced and complicated stage. He's moved into the world of ideas. What is summer? He can ask himself. But what kind of knowledge does a 4-year-old have about what is summer? Maybe he has an image of a tree in a green meadow, a newborn calf. But maybe for another child, it's an image of a hot dog stand and the very special smell that a hot dog stand has and that no one ever smells in winter. Or maybe the sound of waves splashing. More than that, summer may already have a place in a time scale in the mind of this very young child. If he knows that now it's spring, then maybe summer will come, surely summer will come before Christmas. So like adults, though he is still a long way from the ultimate scope of thinking ability, he's already well able to deal with the world of things by intellectual long distance. Now, if his experience at home and in school has been of the kind that keeps his curiosity alive, he will, by the time he's through with kindergarten, have extended his curiosity into practically all the realms of human experience. He's eager to know where things come from, what they are, what they're called. He cares about how things change. What has a cloud to do with snow? What has snow to do with ice? What has ice, for that matter, to do with a drink of water? He's beginning to understand or to try to understand. Are these one thing? In one sense they are. Are they different things? In another sense they are. He cares about people, how they're connected with each other. Who belongs to whom? What has a grandmother got to do with a mother and then with a child? And very soon, how do you get born? And always, of course, finally, if he has the courage to ask, what is dying? It's not inevitable that this remarkable transformation in the ways of knowing that can take place in the human mind will take place for every growing child, or that his curiosity will indeed remain active and exciting to him and to the people who live with him. It depends upon the experience that he has provided in these formative years, and that brings me back to what kind of learning we feel should be provided during this period of development. In general, in most general terms, our goal is to help the child gain knowledge of his world that is meaningful to him through ways that are best suited to his stage of development, and hopefully, always in the course of doing this, to help him to come to feel and to understand how full of interest and zest and living and learning can be. There are many possible ways of analyzing the whole question of what good education is or can be or should be, but I would like to handle this today by talking briefly about 5 kinds of experience that seem like minimum essentials for a 4 or a 5-year-old child who is beginning a school experience. First, he should have extended opportunity to explore the physical world. For this, there needs to be open space, equipment, the kind that he can use with the coordinated use of his whole body, a jungle gym to climb, balancing boards, sawhorses, large wooden crates to push around, slides, wagons, tricycles, cart, all these things that are usually placed in outdoor play space for children. It is in the way in which he spontaneously maneuvers these kinds of objects that he learns something important, how to use his whole body as a controlled tool. And this involves very complex coordination. It's important to the child's feeling of what he is and what he can do. It means that there's learning. We could dare to call it studying involved. A child may have a sudden impulse, a wish to be sitting on the very top of the climbing jungle gym, but that doesn't mean that he can get there by wishing it. It takes repeated efforts and trials, how to manage his arms, his legs, his head, his body, before he really accomplishes that quick kind of monkey-like scurrying up to the top that eventually is one of his accomplishments. Naturally, getting down, if you've ever watched, is even harder. So he needs the opportunity, many opportunities, to begin to use himself as a physical organism that has control and skill and coordination, and, moreover, to know himself as a person who has these skills and accomplishments. At the same time, there's another kind of learning that goes on while he climbs up and down jungle gyms and pushes wheelbarrows around. He's learning what the nature of the physical world is. The things that he heaves around have both size and weight, and the size and the weight are impressions that are registered with him. The things that he pushes around have certain built-in relations, the physical objects. He experiences pressure, leverage, balancing, hoisting. He's working with the principle of the wheel and the axle. Even though these are not the words or the ideas he uses while he is working with the objects or playing with them, he is having the kind of direct experience with the physical world which we have come to consider a fundamental step for the concepts that will be mastered later on. If you've ever had a chance to watch children in this kind of play, it becomes interesting sometimes to stop and think how many kinds of learning are really going on. Perhaps you've seen a child climb to the top of a big structure that he's built out of a few packing cases with a rope in one of his hands. Behind him, he's left a pail. Maybe if you look in the pail, you see carefully laid out little pieces of wood or half a dozen stones nestling at the bottom, and the other end of the rope tied to the pail. The child climbs to the top. When he gets there, he's probably about twice his height from the ground, a vast height from where he is. With a few careful tugs, hand over hand, the pail and its load is hoisted up beside him, and then probably he thumps down, wearied with his work, calls out some little call of triumph to his friends below. Watching this, we can see lots of things. A child having fun. A child enjoying an activity that he has carried through and planned from the beginning to the end by himself. A child solving a problem, since hoisting and the mechanics involved is a problem to a little child, even though the word may have nothing to do with him nor be part of his vocabulary for a long time to come. From another point of view, the child is enjoying a warm sense of accomplishment. And it is this sense of accomplishment which we seek to provide for the children in many different aspects of their learning experience, believing that each accomplishment, each skill, each mastery adds an ingredient of belief in the self and pleasure in what one is able to do in one's environment. Another kind of learning experience has to do with helping the children become increasingly sensitive to the world in which they live, helping them become keen observers of what there is around them, open their eyes and ears to their surroundings. Partly this is done in school by the very fact that there is such a variety of things in the materials provided for play and manipulation. The materials have many uses when they're selected for the schoolroom. The house corner to play home, the blocks to play with, the paints on the easel, the storybooks on the table, the puzzle boards on the shelf. One of the uses is the variety of sense experience that this multitude of materials provides. If you look into the box of covers to use with the doll play, you find a cover that's velvet, smooth, soft. Another one that's thin, almost blows away when you breathe on it. Some are green, some are red. Some are small, some are big. Some have been crocheted and have holes in them. Others are very solid and you can't poke a finger through. The blocks are hard. The clay is not. You can't squeeze a block into a space that it isn't fitted to go into. But if you push clay, you can squeeze it any way you want it to go. And it changes its shape according to how you squeeze it. The sand is rough and gritty. The soap suds, often provided in these schoolrooms for play, are soft and foamy, and so on. There is also a variety of perceptual discrimination. Differences in size, in color, in shape. In the form boards, the differences of shape are clearly accented, for example. And it is these differences that the children respond to when they try to work with them. There are musical instruments that have a whole range of sound, and sound varies not only through a musical instrument, but often through the way the teacher handles her management of the group. A teacher shifts sometimes from a fairly high, loud-pitched voice to a very soft tone. And interestingly enough, it's a soft tone that brings the children to her. These are some ways, illustrative, in which to help children become more sensitive. But things, of course, never do perform the magic. The magic ultimately comes through the teacher, or through all the people who are involved in the teaching relation with the children. It is the adults who themselves are sensitive to the world around, who see the importance of becoming good observers, who can help sharpen the observations and discriminations of the children. For example, there is a teacher who has brought the fish and the fish tank into the room, primarily for the sake of helping children understand that fish can't live unless they're fed. Or helping children understand more than that, they must be fed a certain amount and not overfed, all of which is important for children to understand. But one hopes that there will be a time when this teacher, for no immediate teaching purpose, stands with the child beside the fish tank, watching the fascinating movement of a fish going back and forth, as fascinated herself as the child is. Or at another time, a teacher who stands with children outdoors and watches with them how long you can see the plane that's riding away into the clouds. The teacher who becomes an active guide, helping the children to see, to observe, to discriminate in what there is in the world around them. And in doing this, the teacher is engaging the children in observation as a form of learning. Furthermore, we believe that the child who becomes keenly aware of what is happening around him is building up the feeling of being connected, of belonging in the world in which he lives and sees. If for a moment any of us doubt the importance of keen discriminating observation as a way of knowing and gaining important knowledge, we need only turn to the prescriptions of what makes fundamentally a good scientist. Now, there's a third kind of experience that we want to provide for children. Perhaps we can call it a full opportunity for just doing and making, for acquiring a large repertoire of what we might call action responses. Much of life in school for the very young child consists of this very kind of experience. There are blocks and he builds with them, high buildings, wide buildings, low buildings. And very often, before the buildings he is making really represent anything in the real world, before he starts on that building activity of trains and stations and planes, He is happily using the blocks for the plain skill and pleasure of constructing and designing in space. Or to be able to use crayons, not just for scribbling, but at the point where you can enclose spaces or make parallel lines, one right alongside the other, or trail very neatly and very exactly just within the edge of the paper, is the kind of skill that the child develops and elaborates and enjoys. He's learning, when he does this, to make objects follow his intention, and this is accomplishment, even before he begins to be able to make a picture of a house or a girl or a tree. It's accomplishment to be able to enclose space, to make round ones or square ones or circles that cross each other. It's accomplishment to be able to use a hammer to make a nail go real straight into the wood. And when you can make two pieces of wood stay together with the very nail that you hammered in, that's a real sense of mastery and skill. So is also starting with just an empty page with nothing on it, and then with great concentration covering it all over with red paint. Well, in general, you can see that what I'm talking about here is the importance of giving the children opportunities to develop manipulative, constructive skills, and to realize that with these skills, they are having the experience of changing the things in their world. And let me comment here, too, something else that I think is quite important, and that is that in these experiences, the children are making an impact on their world and the things in it. And this impact is a non-destructive one. The child, in doing these things, is satisfying a basic need that we now recognize all children have to impress themselves upon the things around them, to do it in a way that adds to the skills in their repertoire of responses, and at the same time, to be left with an understanding and a knowledge of themselves as people who can wrought change in their world that is constructive and positive in its outcome. And now we come to a fourth kind of experience for learning. This one takes us into a new psychological realm, really, because here we want to think about how we can support the developmental tendency in the child, which also emerges during this period, to deal with things indirectly, not to push, not to haul, not to tug, to be able to symbolize them, to be thinking about them and dealing with them when they aren't there, to reproduce in the child's own particular way the experiences that have been most meaningful for him. And this the child, given a chance and an atmosphere and a climate that permits it and encourages it, does over and over again in myriad ways. He does it in his gesture when he reproduces actions that he has seen. He does it in his paintings, in his drawings, in his modeling with clay, when in his childlike primitive ways he is trying to bring back experiences that he has had. This progress with rehearsing, reproducing, symbolizing experiences is primarily the foundation of thinking. We provide him, I think it is important to provide him with multiple materials for reliving this experience, because we believe that here again, he strengthens his connection with his world. He builds up a rich reservoir of meanings that become very important to him in the years ahead, when he finds these meanings in the hieroglyphs on the printed page in the reader. Paint, clay, the music to which he moves symbolically and representatively, all these are tools, vehicles for helping the child deepen and select the meanings that are important to him in reliving his experience. But of course, in these years, the most important way of gaining knowledge on this level for the child is through play, and mainly the dramatic play that he engages in freely and fully if the situation is favorable to it. It is the life of pretending for which the school provides in many ways. Materials, blocks, figures, toys, trains, dolls, dress-up clothes, housekeeping things, 100 other things that are the recognized props for the child's pleasure and intentness in reworking the feelings and ideas that he experiences in real life. This becomes one of the most important ways in which the children understand their knowledge, extend their understanding of the world, rehearse again what they realize. In their pretending, they are also free of reality, and this little children need to be. They can make things appear to be the way they really are not. They can make them be the way they would wish them to be. They can express feelings, hostile, angry feelings, that could not be expressed legitimately in their real relationships in life. They set themselves problems, they solve the problems. They take roles, they act like grown-ups, they act like babies. They inevitably get sick, they get well, they even die, and it doesn't matter because they come to life again. They rehearse the knowledge that they have gained about the real world. They're trainmen, engineers, pilots, firemen, mothers, fathers. The whole panorama of life is lived over again in the free dramatic play of the children. And we believe more and more, as we understand childhood, that if there is any way of gaining knowledge that is particularly suitable to this stage of development, it's in the play which they spontaneously devise, but which needs, nevertheless, an attentive and an understanding teacher for its support and its nourishment. Now, maybe it's surprising we have come so far in this talk without even mentioning language as such and concepts. In fact, as you well realize, the development of language and concepts is one of the most important aspects of growth in the early years. The use of words becomes a major tool for the child in dealing symbolically with his experience, in being able to think in more and more complicated ways, to master the number system, to ready himself for being able to deal with the system of written language. And there are recognized and known important stages by means of which a child organizes his understanding and his ideas. Very briefly, let me call these to mind. Objects do not long remain to the child objects just to do things with. Objects begin to have names. They are not just ornaments in our universe. They have uses and functions. They not only have functions, they have shapes and colors and size. They're related to each other. They belong together. There are all kinds of ways of classifying and grouping objects and events. And there comes to the child, eventually, the realization that certain things, even people, can be both the same and different at the same time. Or else, how could it be that a father is also a husband? Not only are objects grouped and classified, but events, too, come to have an order, a place in time in the child's mind. The arrangement of experience on a timeline begins to be understood during this period of development, and so does the very important concept that things change from being one thing into another. This is really a very brief and a very quick way of talking about the whole complex process of how the child develops conceptual order in the world of things and ideas. But perhaps what is most important for us to realize in the educational front is that there are different ways of helping the child to gain mastery in the world of ideas and concepts. First, of course, part of this mastery depends upon being helped to a very skillful and rich and precise use of words and language forms so that he can deal with ideas skillfully through the verbal system. Another important idea educationally is that there are multiple different ways of helping the child to arrange his ideas to bring conceptual order into his experience. One of these is to use specific techniques, of which many have recently been developed, that involve sorting and matching and organizing materials that have been prepared exactly for this purpose. And these techniques have their place and a value in these schoolrooms. Another is to stimulate these intellectual processes in connection with the children's activities while they're being carried on, just as part of life in school. Here, it is up to the teacher to be on the alert for the moments when she can accent the conceptual possibilities. A child hands her a painting, and she doesn't just say, "That's very nice, dear." She says, "Well, today you made a red one. Yesterday, I remember you made a green one." She's helping with the naming of colors without making it a lesson about naming colors. She asks questions as she goes by in the course of the children's play that are in comparative forms. Is John's building taller than Mary's? Sometimes her way of accenting the conceptual possibilities is by asking interesting questions which the children are not expected to answer, questions that she raised to help them probe and think and wonder, but which she and the children together then pursue, maybe by going on a trip in the neighborhood to see something, or perhaps by finding a particular story to read that helps them answer the inquiry that she has stimulated in their minds. Because here, in this sphere of learning almost more than any other, the teacher's role is to stimulate inquiry and to help the child find ways of pursuing his question. The teacher reading a story about a train that goes from the country and passes through the fields and the woods and comes into the city, stops the story at some point to point out to the children, to ask questions, to help them recognize how different is the station that the train passed in the country from the one that it arrived at in the city. She is accenting contrasts and differences. The organization of events in time is another meaningful way of conceptually organizing experience, and this the teacher of young children is likely to do by bringing to the forefront the sequence of activities. The children are young, and they may not be ready to use clock hours for times of day. 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock may not have particular meanings to them. But they are ready to recognize that first they go outside to play, then they have juice, after juice they have a story, and so on. And the teacher accenting this sequence is helping them put a first organization of their life events in a time scale. So it is that the teacher has constantly in mind her function of helping the children clarify ideas and concepts, using her close relations and observation of the meanings of their play and their life experience as her lead for how and when to do this. I've really only touched on the role of a teacher in passing by, as I've been talking about these 5 major kinds of learning experience for children at this stage of development. There are, however, I would like to say, very well-developed and documented techniques for carrying through this role. For example, how to hold discussion periods with these very little children, how to plan and conduct trips away from school to extend their experience, how to stimulate the play, which they themselves initiate. But I do want to mention that beyond the matter of all the specific teaching techniques, important as these are, it is extremely helpful that the teacher of the young child understands that the child is centered in himself, that it's by connecting his new knowledge to the meanings that he has personally organized in his own life, and by helping him bridge his own self-experience to his encounter with the outer world, that she can help him become an integrated child at the stage of development. It's always important, too, for the teacher to bear in mind how much these young children's way of thinking is often a way of fantasy and make-believe. And one of the important ways of growing up, one of the important learning processes that is going on, is the sorting out what is real and what is make-believe. Partly, this is really something a child has to and can do by himself and for himself. But partly, it is also an opportunity for a teacher to guide him toward what is real in the world and what is not, without disparaging his playful fantasy productions. We've been talking about how children learn, taking recognition of the fact that this stage of development calls for skillful, sensitive teaching. But we really cannot close, I'm afraid, without paying attention to the fact that it's not only the direct teaching techniques that constitute a good education for children at this stage of development. Much depends, a great deal depends, upon the way in which the teacher can relate to the child as a person, the extent to which the child can trust the teacher and feel that he is in a relation of mutual understanding with her. And this comes not mysteriously, but from the very concrete ways in which the teacher supplies the supporting role, in which she becomes safe, a very safe kind of person to whom one can bring one's troubles, one's doubts, one's shame, or one's fears. To be a person who is not over-quick to correct, when correction would stop the child in a first hesitant effort, or even make it hard for him to try again. Much also depends on how much the teacher can find ways of controlling children, since children do need to be controlled for their own sake, in such a way that they do not feel hurt or humiliated, and to introduce controls that can appear sensible and reasonable, and they can, even to these very little children. And a great deal depends, too, on the extent to which the teacher can think along with such young minds, not expect them to be as reasonable or as logical as older children will surely be. In fact, even to be able to enjoy some of the transmutations of ideas, some of their creative mistakes, if I can call them that, and recognize them as the playful and the brave work of a young, exploring mind. Eventually, out of all this experience with children and the way they learn and the way we help them learn, we hope for the child that he will begin to see himself, to feel himself as a person who is cared for, who is worthwhile in others' eyes, who is capable of doing things, of seeing things, of mastery, who can communicate with adults and with other children, and who can enjoy his own ability to initiate activities and play. Thank you.